GDPR Material and Territorial Scope. This is an overview of the lesson. We will look at what is the GDPR, which activities does the GDPR apply to, material scope, territorial scope, activities that fall outside the scope of the GDPR. GDPR means General Data Protection Regulation. It comes into force on the 25th of May 2018. So what do we currently have? Well, we have the UK Data Protection Act 1998. Even as we Brexit, we must comply with the GDPR. Great news. So which activities does the GDPR apply to? Generally, it applies to activities which an organisation does which amounts to the processing of personal data of the natural living person. The GDPR is about protecting the rights associated to the data subject's personal data. It applies to banks, law firms, the pharmaceutical company, the train station. It is likely to apply to all organisations. Personal data must not be processed in such a manner which is likely to threaten, damage, harm the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. Organisations can be heavily fined for not complying with the GDPR. Material scope applies to personal data which is processed by automated means. This means information in an electronic form held on a computer, also mobile phones, etc. Applies also to personal data which is part of a filing system or is intended to be paper records in a filing system. Generally, these files are chronologically placed so that you can identify the data subject with the personal data. Territorial scope. P means process and C means controller. Organisations operating within Europe must comply with the GDPR. Organisations operating outside Europe that offer goods and services within Europe, irrespective of whether payment is made, must also comply. Organisations operating within Europe, even if the individuals are outside Europe, irrespective of their nationality, must comply. It all relates to the monitoring of the behaviour of individuals within Europe. So when does the GDPR not apply? When processing of personal data is outside the EU law, at borders checking ID, passports for immigration, asylum purposes. Personal data is used for personal activity. Personal data is used to prevent a crime. Business data. Also where there are derogations where member state countries can actually change or amend certain provisions, for example, interests of national security. Test your understanding. Ascertain whether the GDPR applies in the following situations. Buttons Limited is a UK-based company which sells toys to Italy. Sonia Limited is a cosmetics company based in Japan. It sells products online to French companies. Some free samples are also given away. Files in a filing cabinet chronologically ordered with the names of certain individuals. Personal data of employees on the firm's CRM. Now let's have a look at the answers. With regards to the first one, yes, the GDPR does apply the processing of personal data of data subjects in the UK and Italy. B, yes, even if operating outside the EU, GDPR applies as goods and services are provided into Europe. France, GDPR applies even if products provided are free of charge. In the part C, yes, there is a link between the data and the data subjects, even if it is stored. Stored means recorded, and this means processing as far as the GDPR is concerned. And finally, yes, GDPR does apply for the reasons as mentioned as C above, and also that here the data subjects are considered the employees. This brings us to the end of the lesson. Now please move on to the multiple choice test. Thank you for tuning in.